The invitation arrived like a bomb wrapped in glittered paper. Marcy Ellis stared at it on her kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside her, her hands trembling slightly, not with excitement, but with a lingering ache of old wounds. 10 years. 10 years since high school had chewed her up and spat her out. The envelope was thick, the return address embossed in gold, Crestwood High Alumni Association. Inside, the words practically taunted her. Join us for the 10-year reunion. Let's see how far you've come. Marcy had never been the girl anyone remembered fondly. In high school, she had been the class reject, the awkward, freckled girl who tripped over her own shoelaces, who spoke too loudly at the wrong times, who wore glasses too thick for her delicate face. She had sat alone at lunch, scribbling in journals nobody would ever read, imagining worlds where she was free of the cruel stares, the whispered laughter, the shoves in the hallway. She remembered the night of her senior prom like it was yesterday. The night everyone else celebrated, danced, and took selfies. Marcy had crouched in the shadows behind the school gym, crying quietly, listening to the muffled laughter of the popular clique as they mocked her through the speakers of the gym's sound system. Who invited the weird girl? Someone had laughed, their voice dripping with venom. Marcy had slipped away that night, prom dress torn from a stray nail on the bleachers, and vowed never to return to that world. And yet here it was. 10 years later, Crestwood High wanted her back. A part of her wanted to shred the invitation and light it in the fireplace, as she did with so many reminders of her past. But another part, maybe the part that had refused to die even in the face of relentless cruelty, quivered with curiosity. What would it feel like to walk back in, to see them again? The very people who had mocked her, who had made her feel like a ghost of herself, would they recognize the woman she had become? Marcy's apartment was small, cluttered with model helicopters, aviation manuals, and framed photos of planes she had flown herself. She had never expected to be here, not in her wildest dreams. She was an Apache pilot now, one of the few women in her unit, flying missions that demanded precision, courage, and nerves of steel. The skis were her kingdom, a place where she could prove herself every single day, where nobody could mock her without consequence. Yet the idea of facing her high school tormentors made her stomach twist in a way no turbulence ever had. She considered calling the reunion off. The email from the organizers had even mentioned a cocktail hour, a DJ, and a nostalgic slideshow. The thought made her skin crawl. She could hear their laughter now, echoing across the dance floor of her memory. She'll probably still be a loser. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. Military haircut, short, practical, and sharp. Uniform hung neatly in her closet, ribbons polished, boots scuffed but shining. The reflection staring back was not the timid, awkward girl from 10 years ago. She had broad shoulders now, trained from years in combat readiness drills. Her eyes held a calm ferocity that could land helicopters under enemy fire, could command respect with a single glance. That girl from high school wouldn't even recognize her. And a plan began to form. A quiet, simmering idea that tasted like vengeance, but measured, smart, lethal even in its elegance. She wouldn't just attend the reunion. She wouldn't just walk past the old bullies with quiet dignity. She would make an entrance they would never forget. She would remind them that some labels, the rejects, the losers, were never permanent. Some of them could transform into something almost untouchable. Marcy drove to the reunion in silence, the night air cool against her face. She parked on the edge of the Crestwood High parking lot, hidden in shadows. The gym doors were lit from within, laughter spilling out like smoke. Through the glass she could see them. Jessica LaRue, the queen bee, laughing with her circle of friends, heels clicking, perfect hair, perfect smiles. Nathan Briggs, the quarterback, the boy who had shoved her books into the trash bin during sophomore year, was leaning against the wall, smirking. They looked exactly as she remembered them, frozen in a world that had tried to define her as small, invisible, irrelevant. Marcy adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the weight of the helmet inside. Yes, she had carried that helmet everywhere she went since joining the army, her connection to the sky, to power, to freedom. And tonight, it would serve another purpose. She stepped toward the entrance, heart hammering not with fear but with adrenaline. Every step made her feel alive in a way high school never could. A couple of glances came her way, recognition flickered, confused expressions crossed faces, but they didn't know her. They had no idea what she was capable of now. Inside, the reunion smelled of cheap perfume, spilled drinks, and nostalgia gone sour. Marcy scanned the room, noting the familiar cliques, the whispered gossip, the smug looks that still carried a trace of superiority. The DJ played an old 2000s hit. Someone clinked glasses, someone else laughed too loudly. And all around them the air hummed with the expectation of reunion, a false, fragile civility that masked 10 years of unspoken rivalries. Marcy moved toward the back where the stage for announcements and speeches had been set up. A small crowd gathered, buzzing about the big surprise planned for tonight. She smiled faintly. Big surprise indeed. They had no idea. Her pulse quickened as she unzipped her backpack slightly, fingers brushing the smooth surface of the night vision goggles, the headset, the insignia that marked her as someone who had faced danger most of them could only imagine. The Apache. The helicopter she had flown countless times, executing maneuvers that required split-second decisions and absolute control. And tonight, it wasn't just an aircraft. Tonight, it was a statement. She heard laughter nearby, Jessica LaRue mocking some poor soul over the hors d'oeuvres. Marcy's jaw tightened, and a small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. They thought they had won all those years ago. They thought she would fade into obscurity, a quiet footnote in their memories. But Marcy Ellis had learned how to rise, how to claim the sky, how to transform humiliation into power, how to make the past bow before the present. Then through the gym doors she imagined it. The sound of rotors slicing through the night air, a shadow sweeping across the parking lot, a figure descending in a machine designed for precision, speed, and awe. She pictured their faces, the shock, the disbelief, the sudden, unspoken realization that the class reject had become something they could never mock, never touch, never diminish again. And just as she reached the edge of the gym floor, the sound of a low thrum began to build in her imagination. A thrum that grew louder, reverberating in her chest like the heartbeat of destiny. The crowd inside would never see her coming. Not yet. But they were about to be reminded that some labels, no matter how cruelly assigned, were temporary. And some people, no matter how small or overlooked, could rise with a force that would leave the world stunned. Marcy paused just outside the gym doors. She drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the thrill of what was about to unfold. 10 years of silence, 10 years of invisibility, 10 years of being underestimated. And tonight, everything would change. The night sky whispered promises of shock, awe, and vindication. She could almost hear their laughter turn to gasps. Almost. And then, just before she stepped into the glare of fluorescent lights and the scent of cheap punch, she felt a thrill of anticipation that coursed through her veins like wildfire. She opened the doors, and the crowd inside froze. The gym fell silent as Marcy Ellis stepped through the double doors. At first, they didn't recognize her. The awkward girl who had tripped over lockers and laughed at the wrong times had vanished. In her place was a woman radiating confidence, every movement deliberate, every glance sharp. A hush rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Jessica LaRue froze mid-laugh, the corners of her mouth twitching as she tried to mask recognition. "Is that Marcy?" she whispered, voice cracking slightly. Nathan Briggs' smirk faltered, his brow furrowing. Even the teachers, old familiar faces from years past, blinked at her like someone had switched the lights on in a dark room. Marcy's eyes scanned the crowd. She didn't move to mingle or make small talk. She simply stood there, letting the shock sink in. Every whispered comment, every wide-eyed stare, every stifled gasp became part of her performance. She felt the satisfaction, sweet and slow, of watching them squirm in their assumptions. They had invited her here thinking she would crumble, thinking she would be a punchline, a cautionary tale. But they had underestimated her. They always did. The DJ changed the song, a cheesy, upbeat hit from their senior year. The irony was delicious. The people who had tormented her were now laughing, mingling, dancing, and trying desperately to appear normal. Marcy watched as they clutched their drinks, their postures tense, their smiles forced. She remembered every cruel comment, every shove, every snicker, and she knew exactly how she was going to respond. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message flashed. "Are you ready? They won't see it coming. Apache 23. She smiled faintly and slipped out a side door, the crowd's laughter fatting behind her. Outside, the night was cool and the parking lot stretched out like a blank canvas. And there it was, the Apache helicopter. Black, sleek, and formidable under the moonlight, the rotors already spinning, a low hum vibrating through the asphalt. Marcy's heart raced, not with fear but with exhilaration. This was more than a symbol, it was proof. Proof that the girl they had mocked could rise higher than they ever imagined, literally. The pilot's seat felt like home. She climbed in, helmet in place, the familiar weight of the controls settling under her hands. The engine roared to life, powerful and relentless, shaking the ground beneath her. In moments, the Apache lifted off, defying gravity, cutting through the night sky with a precision only someone like Marcy could command. Meanwhile, back in the gym, the small talk was faltering. Jessica's phone buzzed with a notification. Someone snapped a picture of movement outside the window. Her laughter died mid-sentence as she looked toward the parking lot, her eyes widening. Nathan followed her gaze, a low whistle escaping him. Marcy hovered, rotors slicing through the night air, the entire reunion visible beneath her like an ant farm. She could see the tiny figures below, frozen, some pointing, others stumbling back in disbelief. She maneuvered with practiced grace, dipping the nose of the Apache slightly, then rising higher, making a show of power, control, and inevitability. Inside, whispers cascaded into chaos. "Is that a helicopter?" someone shouted. "Marcy Ellis," another voice echoed. A collective realization dawned. The girl they had tried to humiliate had returned with authority, with force, with something they could never mock. Jessica's voice cracked. Shishika, her fingers shook as she pulled her phone out, desperately trying to record the moment. Nathan, usually composed and arrogant, paled. Even the other alumni, those who had laughed with her before, now gawked in stunned silence. The air was thick with awe, fear, and disbelief. Marcy dipped closer to the gym roof, the rotors whipping papers and napkins into the air, a whirlwind of past and present colliding. The control was exquisite, every movement deliberate, every twist and turn a subtle reminder of skill born from years of dedication, danger, and perseverance. She hovered for a moment, looking down at the shocked faces, and then slowly brought the Apache closer to the gym's side entrance. Then, with a precision that left everyone breathless, she activated the spotlight. A beam of light cut across the dance floor, illuminating her in full glory. Gasps erupted, screams of surprise punctuated the music, and a sense of suspense gripped the crowd. No one moved. No one dared. Marcy's presence was absolute. She wasn't just in the room. She was above it, literally and metaphorically, a force of nature. The whispers turned to frantic chatter. How did she do that?" someone stammered. "She's an Apache pilot," the words barely formed. They were fragments of disbelief, shock, and something darker, fear. The labels of high school, reject, loser, awkward, crumbled under the weight of the truth hovering above them. Marcy maneuvered the helicopter with breathtaking finesse, dipping, rising, then turning sharply. Her mind raced, not with nerves, but with the thrill of every eye below fixed on her. The humiliation they had planned for her had backfired spectacularly. 10 years of ridicule, 10 years of being underestimated, 10 years of whispered jokes and cruel nicknames, all erased in an instant by skill, courage, and the undeniable drama of her arrival. Inside, Jessica stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. Nathan grabbed her arm, steadying her as he too stared, mouth agape. The teachers, once the figures of authority in her life, now looked almost childlike in their surprise. Every ego inflated by high school superiority deflated, just as Marcy had imagined. She hovered, rotors whirling like a living heartbeat, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Then, as if on cue, she executed a slow, precise figure eight over the parking lot, the spotlight cutting across the stunned crowd repeatedly. Each pass reminded them that this was no accident, no coincidence, no lucky break. This was Marcy Ellis, master of her craft, conqueror of skis, and the girl they had laughed at now commanding awe and respect. And just as she prepared to land, the Apache's powerful nose tilted, and a recorded message blared from the speakers on the helicopter, echoing into the gym. Class of Crestwood High, 10 years ago you humiliated me. Tonight I rise above. Remember me now. The gym erupted. Phones flashed, screams mingled with laughter, disbelief morphed into stunned applause. And somewhere deep inside, Marcy felt a surge of satisfaction, not just for herself, but for the years she had endured, for every moment they had tried to make her small. She had turned their reunion into a spectacle of her triumph. But even as the crowd gawked, the sense of suspense remained. What would she do next? Would she land and confront them? Would she leave them to stew in their own shame? The tension was palpable, a silent promise that the night was far from over. And above it all, hovering like a dark angel over the gym, Marcy Ellis smiled beneath her helmet. The class reject was gone. The pilot, the warrior, the woman in control of her destiny remained. And her story, the one they had tried to erase, was just beginning. The gym's chaos was like a living thing, screams, gasps, and flashes from phones bouncing off the walls in staccato bursts. Marcy hovered above them, the Apache's rotors whipping the night air into a furious storm. She could see every wide-eyed face below, every frozen smile, every dropped drink. They were not just shocked, they were terrified, and it thrilled her. This was her moment, not of revenge exactly, but of undeniable reclamation. Jessica LaRue clutched Nathan's arm like a lifeline. How did she get that helicopter? She stammered, her voice trembling. Her carefully curated social armor, heels, hair, designer dress, did nothing here. No status, no charm, no gossip cliques could protect her from the reality hovering just outside the gym doors. Nathan Briggs, once the king of the senior class, tried to puff up his chest, to reclaim some semblance of control, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Maybe she's part of the military now," he said, voice barely louder than a whisper, like saying it aloud might make it true. Marcy's gloved hands danced over the controls, her training guiding every movement. She dipped the Apache low, sweeping the light beam across the terrified crowd. The wind tore at napkins, hair, and loose papers, a tactile reminder of her absolute presence. And then, just when the panic seemed to reach its peak, she raised the helicopter higher, giving them a moment to catch their breath, but only briefly. Inside, teachers whispered among themselves, stunned. Mrs. Caldwell, who had been her English teacher, muttered, "I never thought. She always had that spark, but this." Her voice trailed off as she, too, watched Marcy assert herself with awe and precision. Years of knowing her as shy, awkward, and overlooked had no bearing on the woman now dominating the night sky. Marcy's mind, however, wasn't on them. She wasn't here to terrify for the sake of fear. She was here to make them remember to see her as she truly was. And for that, she had to escalate the drama further. With a calculated tilt of the rotors, she maneuvered the Apache into a hovering circle around the parking lot, her spotlight sweeping the reunion floor like a lighthouse warning ships of danger. Below, whispers turned into frantic murmurs. "Is she showing off?" one alum asked. "Or is she angry?" Another person gasped as someone dropped a drink, its contents soaking the pristine gym carpet. The spectacle was mesmerizing, terrifying, unforgettable. Marcy knew their minds were racing. The high school hierarchy they had relied on for a decade had been obliterated in a single stroke, and she could feel the power of that realization feeding her. Every whisper of awe, every stunned expression, was a reminder of how far she had come. Then, without warning, she descended, hovering just above the gym's side entrance. The rotor's wash rattled the windows, shaking the floorboards, making drinks tremble in their glasses. Marcy's voice came through a microphone mounted on the Apache, amplified and clear. Class of Crestwood High 10 years ago, you laughed at me. Tonight, I didn't just show up. I arrived on my own terms. And I am not here to ask for recognition. I am here to remind you that underestimating someone, mocking them, humiliating them, can be a mistake you never recover from. The silence that followed was almost sacred. No one dared interrupt. Jessica's jaw dropped, Nathan's hands shook slightly. Some alumni instinctively took a step back, as if the Apache itself demanded respect. Then came a ripple of daring. One of the braver or more foolish guests clapped slowly, uncertainly. Another followed, then another. Soon the applause built, hesitant at first, then louder. It wasn't just fear, it was acknowledgement. The recognition of skill, audacity, and resilience. Marcy let it wash over her, savoring every second. She had earned this, not by vengeance, but by being undeniable. And yet she wasn't done. The thrill, the suspense, demanded escalation. Marcy keyed the intercom again. And for those of you who think a helicopter is just a machine, let me show you something you'll never forget. She tilted the Apache, rising swiftly, then executed a breathtaking maneuver, a slow, controlled loop above the parking lot. The spotlight cut through the night sky like a blade, illuminating stunned faces below. Cameras captured every second, their phones fumbling to record what seemed impossible. The murmurs of disbelief turned to exclamations of awe. She's amazing. She's insane. How is she doing that? Inside, Jessica finally found her voice, trembling with frustration and fear. I can't believe this. She was nothing. Her words were sharp but hollow. No one could challenge the truth hovering above them. Marcy's eyes scanned the crowd. She wasn't just looking at Jessica and Nathan. She was looking at every single person who had dismissed her, ignored her, humiliated her. And she realized something profound. They had no idea who she had become. They had no frame of reference for the person who had endured, who had learned, who had mastered the skis and herself. Then came the next act. Marcy hovered near the gym roof, the rotors throwing shadows across the parking lot like a moving storm. She had always loved the Apache for its precision, its elegance, its ability to assert dominance without unnecessary destruction. And tonight, she would use it to make them understand what true mastery looked like. The doors to the gym burst open, and the reunion crowd spilled into the parking lot, mesmerized. The sound of rotors thundered over the music, a rhythmic drum of anticipation. Phones were raised, cameras flashing. The high school bullies were pale, frozen, their confidence shattered. And in that moment, Marcy realized that the power of presence, control, skill, audacity was far stronger than any insult, any whisper, any cruel joke. A sudden gust of wind kicked up, tossing napkins and loose papers into the air like confetti. The crowd erupted into gasps and cheers. Marcy dipped the Apache in a slow arc over the lot, spotlight cutting across the stunned audience. For a moment, it was pure theater, cinematic and raw. And then she landed with precision, rotors slicing the air until the machine settled into a gentle hover. The silence afterward was thick, almost holy. Marcy removed her helmet, revealing her face for the first time to the stunned crowd. Her expression was calm, but the intensity in her eyes left no doubt. This was the girl they had tried to break. This was the woman they would never forget. Jessica and Nathan approached, hesitant, as if stepping toward a lion. Marcy, Jessica began, but her voice faltered. She had no words for this. Nathan tried a weak laugh. I guess you really have changed. Marcy smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement not of apology but of triumph. Not changed, evolved, she said. Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of 10 years of resilience, discipline, and determination. And just when it seemed the moment had peaked, a low, ominous rumble vibrated through the parking lot, one that was not from the Apache. Marcy's instincts tensed. Something else was coming, something unexpected. The thrill, the suspense, the curiosity, everything intensified. She looked up at the night sky. Her pulse quickened. There was more to come, and she wasn't finished yet. The low rumble rolled across the parking lot like a living thing, vibrating through the soles of shoes, rattling glasses, and sending a shiver through the stunned crowd. Everyone looked up instinctively, searching the night sky. Some shields of confidence faltered, others dropped entirely. The high school elites who had once ruled with sneers and whispered cruelty now seemed fragile, childlike in the face of a force they couldn't comprehend. Marcy's hands tightened on the Apache controls. Her instincts, honed over years of flying in tense, dangerous situations, screamed that this was no ordinary moment. She scanned the horizon. The source of the rumble was coming fast, closer, and unmistakable. The unmistakable silhouette of another Apache, cutting through the night, rotors slicing the air like knives. Her heart didn't race with fear. It raced with exhilaration. She had been expecting reactions from below, not a reinforcement from above. The second Apache banked, forming a synchronized pattern with hers. The two machines, black as midnight, became twin shadows of precision, power, and authority. The crowd gasped collectively, their shock amplifying into an almost tangible energy that crackled through the night. Jessica LaRue's mouth fell open. Nathan Briggs' smirk vanished entirely, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Is that coordinated?" he asked, voice trembling. The other alumni murmured in awe, their phones raised, cameras shaking in hands that could barely keep up with the spectacle above. Marcy keyed her microphone again. Her voice rang out, crisp and commanding. "Class of Crestwood High, I hope you're beginning to understand that some of us don't just survive humiliation. We rise above it. And sometimes, we bring friends who know exactly how to make an entrance." From the second Apache, a spotlight swept the gym roof. For a brief moment, the two beams crossed in a dramatic X, illuminating the stunned crowd below. The wind kicked up with fury, tossing debris and napkins in every direction. Music blared faintly from the gym, drowned beneath the thunderous sound of dual rotors. Marcy maneuvered the Apache to hover slightly above the crowd, precision practiced over thousands of flight hours guiding every motion. The synchronization between the two helicopters was flawless, like a dance that required absolute trust, focus, and skill. And for the crowd, it was mesmerizing. Terror mixed with awe, humiliation intertwined with wonder, and disbelief became impossible to contain. Jessica grabbed Nathan's arm. We can't even," she stammered, unable to form coherent sentences. All her carefully curated confidence, all the power she had wielded in high school, was gone. Every joke, every insult, every cruel word from 10 years ago was now meaningless in the face of Marcy's display. Below, some alumni began to whisper. Some started laughing nervously, others stared in stunned silence. They were witnessing something cinematic, extraordinary, and terrifyingly beautiful all at once. Marcy's performance was not just spectacle, it was a lesson, a demonstration of what it meant to rise above ridicule, fear, and underestimation. Then Marcy brought the Apache down slightly so the rotor's wind swept through the crowd. Hair flew, jackets flapped, drinks sloshed dangerously close to spilling. She tilted the nose of the helicopter in a deliberate arc, spotlight slicing across the stunned faces below. The thrill of control coursed through her veins. She was untouchable, she was unstoppable, and she had arrived exactly when she meant to. The second Apache descended as well, hovering slightly to the side, a silent companion amplifying the drama. Marcy's eyes scanned the crowd below. Her gaze locked on Jessica, then Nathan, then the others who had once delighted in her humiliation. They were frozen, mouths open, hands clutching phones in disbelief. And in that instant, Marcy felt a deep, satisfying clarity. This was no longer about revenge. It was about reclamation. The intercom crackled again. Marcy's voice was calm but sharp, carrying a weight no one could ignore. "Some of you thought I was invisible. Some of you thought I would never amount to anything. But invisibility is a choice when you are underestimated. And sometimes, the underestimated become the most unforgettable." A hush fell over the crowd as the words sank in. The music from the gym had died, replaced entirely by the rhythmic thrum of dual helicopters. People craned their necks, whispering, pointing, some in disbelief, some in admiration. The high school hierarchy, once unshakable in its delusions of superiority, had crumbled before a force of skill, courage, and determination. Then, without warning, Marcy executed a daring move. She tilted the Apache forward in a controlled descent, swooping low over the parking lot, spotlight catching every stunned expression. She rose again, spinning slightly, performing a maneuver that made the second helicopter mirror her motion flawlessly. The crowd erupted in awe, applause, gasps, and some nervous laughter. They were witnessing a spectacle that defied imagination, a performance that fused fear, admiration, and absolute cinematic power. Jessica whispered to Nathan, voice shaking, We made a huge mistake inviting her here." Nathan's jaw tightened, eyes glued to Marcy's graceful movements above. "We underestimated her, completely." Marcy hovered once more, her gaze sweeping across the entire crowd. The realization struck her fully. These people, the ones who had tried to humiliate her, who had ignored her, mocked her, and belittled her for years, were powerless now. And they knew it. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. The Apache's rotors hummed like a living pulse, a heartbeat that resonated through the parking lot and into the memories of every single person below. Marcy's display was not just about intimidation, it was about proof. Proof that determination, skill, and courage could rewrite any story, erase any label, and leave the past utterly transformed. The second Apache dipped slightly, as if emphasizing her point, and the twin spotlights converged on the gym. Phones snapped furiously, capturing the dramatic scene for posterity. Social media would explode tomorrow with videos, hashtags, and captions describing the night the class reject returned with absolute authority. And then, just as Marcy prepared to land both helicopters in a show of controlled finale, a subtle but distinct sound reached her ears, an engine different from the two Apache. A car speeding toward the parking lot, headlights slicing through the darkness. She frowned slightly. The suspense thickened. Who else would dare approach now? Who had come to witness, or perhaps challenge, the woman they had all underestimated? The crowd below, oblivious to the approaching vehicle, continued to cheer and gawk. Marcy's instincts sharpened. The night was far from over. Something was about to happen that would elevate suspense, tension, and drama to an entirely new level. And in that moment, hovering high above, Marcy felt a thrill unlike any she had experienced before. Anticipation, power, and the undeniable knowledge that no one, not even her past tormentors, could predict her next move. The night sky was alive. The wind carried whispers of awe, and from the shadows of the parking lot, a new mystery approached, one that would push everyone, including Marcy, to the edge of disbelief. The headlights cut through the darkness like twin searchlights, carving a path across the asphalt toward the reunion crowd. Marcy hovered the Apache slightly higher, her eyes narrowing, scanning the approaching vehicle. Every instinct honed over countless missions screamed that this was no ordinary arrival. The rumble of the car's engine combined with the rotor's thunder, layering suspense into the night. Inside the gym, the crowd continued to marvel at Marcy and the second Apache, but gradually attention shifted. Whispers of curiosity turned to fear as someone shouted, "Who's that coming?" A hush fell. Even Jessica and Nathan paused mid-step, the smug confidence of high school years washed away in the shadow of uncertainty. The car skidded to a stop near the edge of the lot, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. A figure stepped out, silhouetted in the glare of headlights. Marcy squinted through her visor. Recognition struck her with a jolt. It was Officer Daniels, the former ROTC instructor who had watched her struggle through high school, dismissed her potential, and then been one of the few adults who had actually told her she could do more. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an intensity in his eyes that mirrored her own. Daniels raised a hand, signaling to Marcy. Relief and recognition washed over her. She keyed the intercom, voice firm yet calm. "Daniels, I see you made it." "Couldn't miss this," Daniels replied, voice carrying through the speakers. Looks like you've got them all exactly where you want them." Below, the crowd had noticed the interaction. Murmurs spread. "Who's that with her?" someone asked. The tension ratcheted up, another layer of drama intersecting with the awe of the helicopters. People began speculating. Was this a friend, a rival, or someone else entirely? Marcy's fingers danced over the controls, executing a slow, graceful orbit over the parking lot. She lowered the Apache slightly, making it clear that the next phase of the spectacle was about to begin. The second Apache mirrored her movements, creating a visual symphony of power and precision that left the crowd frozen in disbelief. Jessica and Nathan exchanged a glance. Jessica whispered almost to herself, I think we've completely lost control." Nathan nodded, pale, lips pressed into a thin line. This was no reunion. This was a show of authority and mastery that none of them had anticipated, a real-life demonstration of skill and courage they could barely comprehend. Then, without warning, Marcy spoke again over the intercom, her voice cutting through the night air with a mixture of authority and satisfaction. "Class of Crestwood High, tonight is not about revenge. Tonight is about recognition. Recognition that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that rise the highest. And tonight, that strength has a name: Marcy Ellis." The crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers, applause, and stunned silence. The high school elites shifted uncomfortably under the weight of truth. The girl they had humiliated was no longer small, no longer overlooked, no longer invisible. Officer Daniels moved closer to the helicopters, signaling to the reunion organizers below. "They need to see this," he said. "Make sure everyone gets a clear view." Marcy's pulse quickened with anticipation. She had trained for years for moments like this, though never in quite such a public, personal arena. Her skill wasn't just mechanical. It was theatrical, commanding, mesmerizing. Every pass over the crowd, every tilt of the spotlight, every synchronized movement with the second Apache told a story of triumph over fear, over ridicule, over 10 years of being underestimated. The crowd below began to murmur, some cheering, some gasping, some pointing. Phones clicked and flashed like fireworks, capturing the unbelievable scene. The once powerful clique of high school elites were now at the mercy of astonishment, their authority dissolved in the shadow of Marcy's arrival. Jessica's knees buckled slightly as she whispered, I can't believe she's doing all this." Nathan, white-faced and rigid, muttered, We should never have mocked her, ever." Marcy tilted the Apache into a tight, precise bank, then executed a smooth spiral upward. From her vantage point, the crowd looked like ants, and she felt the intoxicating sense of being untouchable. Yet beneath that exhilaration, there was something else, a thrill of suspense. She knew the night wasn't over. Something was about to intersect with this perfect display, something that would escalate the emotional stakes even further. As she hovered, she noticed shadows shifting near the edge of the parking lot. Not alumni, not reporters, but someone or something moving fast. Her heart rate ticked up in anticipation, training kicking in. She adjusted the Apache's position, maintaining control while assessing the unknown. Suddenly, a flash of metal reflected the lights. It was a drone, high-powered, industrial-grade, hovering with alarming precision. The crowd below gasped, confused, terrified. Jessica let out a high-pitched squeak and stumbled back. Nathan's hand shot toward her shoulder instinctively. What is that?" he stammered. Marcy's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary drone. It moved with intent, as if guided by someone who knew exactly how to escalate suspense and fear. Her fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the Apache to hover in a defensive yet dramatic posture. From the drone, a loudspeaker crackled. A distorted, robotic voice echoed across the parking lot. "Marcy Ellis, your reunion spectacle has been noted, but the sky is not yours alone tonight." A shiver ran through the crowd. The reunion that had begun as a night of smug satisfaction for the elites had transformed into a public theater of suspense, with new, unknown stakes. Phones captured every moment, social media was about to explode, and the emotional tension reached a fever pitch. Marcy's mind raced. The drone was fast, controlled, dangerous, but she felt alive, not afraid but alert, exhilarated, ready. The Apache beneath her was an extension of her own strength, and she wasn't about to be outmaneuvered. The crowd could sense it, the subtle shift from awe to tension, from spectacle to suspense. She keyed the microphone again, voice firm, unwavering. "Class of Crestwood High, it seems we have a visitor, and they want to test whether the underestimated can truly command the sky. I welcome the challenge." The twin Apache hovered like giants over the parking lot, their presence commanding respect, their rotors slicing the night. Below, the crowd's emotions oscillated wildly, fear, excitement, admiration, and suspense all entwined. Everyone knew this night would be remembered, recounted, and shared for years to come. The drone circled, fast and deliberate, a silent threat with mechanical precision. Marcy's adrenaline surged. This was more than a reunion spectacle now. This was a test of nerve, skill, and presence, a challenge only someone like her could meet, and the crowd, frozen in awe, could only watch. As the drone came closer, Marcy realized that tonight humiliation would never again touch her. She was in control, commanding every eye, every heartbeat, every gasp. And the suspense, the thrill of the unknown, was electric, almost unbearable. She tilted the Apache forward, preparing to intercept the drone in a display that would leave the entire crowd breathless. This was the moment where skill, courage, and poise would collide with danger and spectacle. And Marcy Ellis, the girl they had tried to humiliate 10 years ago, would rise higher than anyone could imagine. The drone zipped through the night sky with mechanical precision, its rotors thrumming like a sinister heartbeat. Marcy's hands gripped the Apache controls, each movement deliberate, calculated. Her mind worked in fractions of a second, analyzing trajectory, velocity, wind patterns, and the behavior of the drone. Years of aerial combat had taught her one undeniable truth: hesitation could be fatal. Below, the crowd held their breath. The reunion that had begun as a nostalgic gathering had transformed into a battlefield of suspense and awe. Phones recorded every moment, Marcy's Apache hovering like guardian angels above, the unknown drone darting through the night like a predatory bird. Jessica LaRue grabbed Nathan's arm, wide-eyed. Is she going to? Her voice trailed off, lost in the roar of the rotors. Nathan's usual arrogance was gone, replaced by raw fear. She's going to take it down, isn't she? Marcy's jaw tightened. The drone wasn't just a threat. It was a symbol of every obstacle she had ever faced. Underestimated, dismissed, underestimated again. But she was no longer the shy, awkward girl who had hidden behind lockers. She was a pilot, a warrior, a woman who commanded the skis, and she wasn't about to be intimidated. She executed a precise vertical climb, pulling the Apache above the drone's altitude. The crowd gasped as she performed a maneuver that would have terrified even the most experienced pilots. The drone zipped beneath her, and she banked sharply, shadowing it in a perfect aerial intercept. "Class of Crestwood High," she spoke over the intercom, her voice steady, authoritative, carrying over the roar of the rotors. "Some things in life are meant to challenge you. Some things test whether the underestimated can rise above every expectation. Tonight, I prove that we can." The drone reacted instantly, accelerating toward her, testing her reaction. Marcy tilted the Apache, banking with precision. The night sky became a chessboard of movement and counter-movement. Spotlights crisscrossed the parking lot, highlighting the stunned, frozen crowd below. Jessica whispered to Nathan, panic rising in her voice. I don't think she's just playing anymore." Nathan shook his head. "No, this is something else. Something serious." Marcy felt the thrill, the adrenaline, the electric pulse of suspense. Every instinct she had learned over years of flying Apache in hostile environments kicked in. She countered the drone's trajectory, closing in slowly. It wasn't just about dominance. It was about control, finesse, precision. And the crowd could see it all, wide-eyed and speechless. The drone darted suddenly, aiming for a direct pass over the gym. Panic rippled through the alumni. "Watch out!" someone shouted, but Marcy was ready. She banked sharply, intercepting the drone's path in a flawless maneuver. Spotlights from her Apache illuminated the small, menacing machine. The audience's astonishment reached fever pitch. And then, with a swift, precise move, Marcy deployed a magnetic net from the Apache, a device she had designed for aerial exercises. The drone collided with it, becoming entangled and spiraling harmlessly to the asphalt below. The crowd erupted in cheers, disbelief, and applause. Phones captured the moment, the viral footage of the night already being created in real time. Jessica collapsed into Nathan's arms, pale as paper. I, she whispered. Nathan's hands shook as he muttered, We have no idea what she's capable of." Marcy hovered, letting the Apache settle slightly. The second Apache mirrored her movements, a silent partner in the spectacle. She keyed the intercom once more. "Tonight you've seen the power of persistence, the courage to rise, the discipline to master your own destiny. And yes, the underestimated can rise above every obstacle, every insult, every humiliation. Remember this night." The crowd below erupted into applause. The combination of helicopters, maneuvering, lights, and the dramatic drone confrontation had left everyone breathless. For once, the high school elites, Jessica, Nathan, and their circle, had no defense, no comeback, no smirk to mask their shock. They had been humbled in the most cinematic, unforgettable way possible. Marcy slowly brought the Apache down for a controlled landing near the edge of the lot. The rotors kicked up a whirlwind that sent napkins, papers, and even a few chairs skittering across the asphalt. The crowd parted instinctively, giving her space. Every eye followed her movements, some applauding, some gasping, some frozen in awe. Officer Daniels stepped forward from the parking lot, clapping slowly. "Incredible work, Marcy. Absolutely incredible," he said. His approval, calm yet full of respect, carried weight. Marcy nodded subtly, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The drone lay harmlessly on the asphalt, its menacing presence neutralized. Marcy knew that this symbolic victory, the triumph over technology, over spectacle, over fear, was as important as every moment she had spent rising above her high school tormentors. Tonight wasn't about humiliation. It was about proving the impossible possible. Jessica finally found her voice, trembling. "Marcy, we never knew," her words trailed into silence. Nathan's lips pressed together as he muttered, We were idiots. 10 years ago and tonight too." Marcy's gaze swept across the stunned reunion attendees, her expression calm but fierce. "It's not about knowing," she said evenly. "It's about realizing, and some lessons need to be seen to be believed." The crowd, still buzzing with adrenaline, began to cheer again, this time louder, more sincerely. Phones continued to flash, capturing every detail: the helicopters, the drone, the precise maneuvers, and Marcy herself, standing tall and victorious. And then came the quiet moment, a pause that held suspense like a drawn bowstring. The night had been transformed from nostalgia to drama, from a routine reunion to a cinematic spectacle that would echo in memories, social media feeds, and hearts alike. But even in that pause, Marcy felt the weight of something more. The knowledge that her presence, her triumph, and her courage had irrevocably changed the way these people would see her forever. As the Apache finally powered down, the rotors slowing to a gentle stop, Marcy climbed out gracefully, helmet in hand. The wind whipped her hair, tossing strands across her face, but her smile remained composed. She had taken control. She had proven her worth. She had risen. And the reunion crowd, still catching their collective breath, knew one thing for certain. The class reject they had tried to humiliate was no longer anyone's target. She had become untouchable, unforgettable, and above all, victorious. Yet even in that victory, Marcy felt the pulse of suspense still thrumming in the night. She had conquered the immediate threats, but the echoes of the past, and the choices she would make next, were far from finished. Something in her gut hinted at one final act, a culmination of 10 years of endurance, courage, and rising above the impossible. The night sky shimmered above Crestwood High. Applause, awe, and disbelief filled the air, and Marcy Ellis, standing tall amidst it all, knew that the final chapter of this extraordinary reunion, one that would shock, inspire, and leave an indelible mark, was just beginning. The parking lot had become a stage unlike anything Crestwood High had ever seen. Helicopters had settled, the drone lay neutralized, and yet the tension in the air was electric, almost tangible. Every alumni, teacher, and former bully knew the night had transformed into a spectacle that would never be forgotten. But Marcy wasn't done. Not yet. She stepped forward from the Apache, boots clicking on asphalt, the wind still whipping around her like a halo of command. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a silent corridor. Jessica and Nathan stood frozen, their faces pale, their earlier arrogance vanished entirely. For the first time, they were powerless. Marcy's voice rang out, amplified by the PA system on the helicopter. 10 years ago, you thought you could define me. You laughed, you whispered, you humiliated. You made me a joke in a room where I didn't belong. Tonight, I am not that girl. The crowd shifted, leaning in, sensing the gravity of her words. Phones rose to capture every syllable, but even technology couldn't contain the raw emotion in her voice. It wasn't anger. It wasn't vengeance. It was triumph. And the subtle undercurrent of satisfaction that she controlled every moment made it almost unbearable to watch. Jessica swallowed hard. We didn't realize," she muttered. Nathan's lips twitched in a grimace. He had no clever comeback, no charm to salvage his pride. They had underestimated Marcy. Every cruel comment, every prank, every whispered insult. They had fed the fire that had now become her presence, her authority, her aura. Marcy raised her hand slightly and the silence deepened. "You see, I could have humiliated you back," she said, her eyes scanning the familiar faces of the crowd, locking onto the bullies who had made her life miserable. "I could have exposed every failure, every weakness, every insecurity you hid behind. But I chose something better. I chose to rise, to master myself, to conquer my fears, to learn skills you never imagined I could." The crowd gasped collectively. The Apache loomed behind her like twin sentinels, their presence reinforcing the power she radiated. Even the teachers looked on in awe, realizing that the shy, awkward girl they once knew had become a force they couldn't ignore. Jessica's voice cracked. I think we're supposed to apologize." She looked around, realizing the rest of the high school elites were frozen, unsure how to react. Marcy tilted her head slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Apologies are meaningless if you don't learn from your mistakes. Tonight is about seeing me for what I became despite you, not because of you. But maybe, just maybe, you'll remember this lesson for the rest of your lives." Nathan clenched his fists, jaw tight. "We never expected this," he admitted, voice low, brittle. There was no bravado left, no smirk to hide behind. They had underestimated her once, and now they were powerless to do so again. Marcy's gaze softened slightly as she looked at the entire crowd. "Some of you might still see me as the quiet girl in the corner, the one who didn't fit in. But tonight, I hope you understand. Those you dismiss are not always what they seem. Some of us have been training, learning, and waiting for the moment we prove that you never truly know someone's potential." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder this time, a mix of awe, admiration, and relief. Phones flashed, capturing Marcy standing there, calm, commanding, triumphant. She radiated power not through intimidation alone, but through mastery of herself, her skills, and her destiny. Then came the final act. Marcy keyed the intercom one last time. "Class of Crestwood High, 10 years ago I was mocked. Tonight you've seen what I can do, but remember this: humiliation is temporary, strength is permanent, courage is unshakable, and the underestimated always rise. A beat of silence followed. Then, as if on cue, the Apache lifted slightly, spinning slowly in a precise pattern above her, the lights cutting across the parking lot like twin searchlights from a dream. The crowd gasped in unison, overwhelmed by the sheer cinematic spectacle. Jessica finally lowered her head, shame and awe mixing in her expression. I didn't realize her voice faltered. Nathan's lips pressed together as he muttered, "We should never underestimate anyone ever again." Marcy's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, the intensity of command giving way to a quiet, almost maternal satisfaction. She had arrived, executed her performance flawlessly, conquered fear, neutralized threats, and delivered her message. But more importantly, she had shown that true strength comes from preparation, skill, and persistence, not cruelty, gossip, or superficial power. The applause continued to swell, surrounding her with affirmation. Some alumni approached cautiously, nodding, clapping, their faces alight with admiration. Teachers looked on, proud beyond words. And above all, Marcy felt the profound, almost cinematic satisfaction of reclaiming her narrative. Yet even in this moment of triumph, the suspense lingered. For the first time, she allowed herself to glance at the shadows beyond the parking lot. Somewhere in the night, there was still an unspoken question. What would happen next? Could anyone truly challenge this moment? Could anyone rise above her as she had risen above so many? The air hung heavy with anticipation. The night had shifted from nostalgia to awe, from routine reunion to unforgettable spectacle, from old rivalries to lessons in humility and respect. Every whispered conversation, every camera flash, every gasping spectator reinforced one undeniable truth. Marcy Ellis, once the class reject, had rewritten the narrative completely. And then, with the Apache lowering their rotors slowly, the crowd's attention returned fully to her. Marcy took a final step forward, the wind from the rotors brushing against her face, hair whipping dramatically. She looked at Jessica and Nathan one last time, her eyes piercing, calm, and commanding. "You laughed at me once," she said quietly, yet every word carried like a drumbeat. "But tonight I soared above you all, remember that." The words hung in the night like a challenge, a declaration, and a closure all at once. Phones continued to flash, the footage already destined to go viral, capturing the moment of ultimate triumph. And then she turned, walking toward the edge of the lot where her Apache awaited, boots striking the asphalt with quiet authority. The crowd parted instinctively. Whispers turned to murmurs of awe. Even the former bullies could do nothing but watch, powerless, humbled, and transformed by the sheer presence of the woman they had once tried to humiliate. The suspense, the drama, the cinematic perfection of the moment was almost overwhelming. For everyone, it was a night of disbelief, admiration, and revelation. And for Marcy, it was the culmination of 10 years of endurance, skill, and courage, the final statement she had been waiting to deliver. As she climbed back into the Apache, helmet in hand, the last words echoed across the crowd. "Class of Crestwood High, never forget, the underestimated always rise." The rotors roared to life one last time, carrying her above the crowd into the night, leaving behind a stunned, speechless, and forever changed audience. The reunion would never be the same, and neither would the memory of the girl they had once mocked. The roar of the Apache's rotors faded into the night as Marcy lifted off, carrying herself higher and higher until the crowd below was a collection of startled faces and waving phones. The wind whipped around her, echoing the storm of emotions that had built throughout the reunion, the disbelief, the awe, the embarrassment of those who had once tried to humiliate her. From above, everything looked smaller, including the petty rivalries that had once defined high school hierarchies. In the parking lot, alumni stared skyward, mouths agape, cameras shaking in hands that could barely capture what had happened. Some were cheering. Others whispered prayers of astonishment. Even the teachers, those who had seen Marcy as a quiet, shy girl, were stunned. They now understood she had become unstoppable, not just because of her skills, but because of her courage, determination, and unwavering resolve. Jessica LaRue clutched Nathan's arm, her face pale. I can't believe it," she stammered, voice trembling. Nathan, whose arrogance had been a shield for a decade, looked defeated, his shoulders slumped. "We were fools," he admitted quietly. The words were heavy, sincere, stripped of the bravado they had worn for so long. Marcy hovered in the Apache for a moment, letting the scene below sink in. She felt the pulse of victory in her veins, but she also felt something unexpected, an almost cinematic serenity. 10 years of ridicule, 10 years of being overlooked had led to this moment. And the beauty of it wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. It was proof that she had risen fully beyond what anyone thought possible. The second Apache, piloted by Officer Daniels, mirrored her movements, forming a perfect tableau of precision and mastery. Together, they created an image that would remain etched into everyone's memory forever. Two unstoppable forces, commanding the night sky, untouchable, almost surreal in their presence. Marcy's voice echoed over the intercom one final time. "Tonight wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about proving me right. That every skill I've learned, every obstacle I've overcome, every ounce of courage I've mustered, it was for this moment. Not to humiliate, not to mock, but to rise above. To show that the underestimated can always become unforgettable." A hush fell over the crowd below. For a moment, no one dared speak. The words lingered in the night, carrying the weight of 10 years of struggle, of determination. The Apache rotors throbbed like a heartbeat, a living testament to power and mastery. Jessica finally spoke, her voice trembling but honest. "Marcy, we never realized how incredible how far you've come." Her words were awkward, incomplete, but genuine. Nathan nodded silently beside her, too humbled for speech. Marcy allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile beneath her helmet. It wasn't triumph over them. It was triumph over everything they had represented, the cruelty, the mockery, the disbelief. She had transformed every insult into fuel for mastery, every ridicule into resilience, and every doubt into undeniable proof. She banked the Apache in a slow, dramatic arc over the parking lot, spotlight sweeping across the stunned alumni one last time. Papers fluttered like confetti in the wake of the rotor wash. The scene was cinematic in every sense: wind, lights, shadows, awe, and a crowd forever changed. Then she executed a controlled landing near the edge of the lot. The rotor slowed, kicking up a last whirl of wind. She stepped out gracefully, helmet in hand, boots clicking on asphalt. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of engines and the occasional cheer breaking through the quiet. Marcy paused, looking at the crowd one final time. This was more than a reunion. It was a statement, a declaration, and a lesson all at once. Every former bully, every critic, every person who had laughed at her now understood the power of persistence, preparation, and courage. Officer Daniels approached, smiling proudly. "You didn't just fly," he said, voice low but full of awe. "You conquered." Marcy nodded. "It wasn't about them," she said softly. "It was about proving to myself that I could." The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring amongst themselves, some cheering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The story of the reunion would spread far beyond this night. Social media would light up with footage of Marcy's Apache, the drone, the maneuvers, and the dramatic confrontation. Hashtags would trend. Videos would go viral. Everyone who had doubted her would be forced to confront the reality of what she had become. Jessica lingered, finally gathering the courage to approach. She extended a tentative hand. "Marcy, I'm sorry," she said, voice sincere. Nathan stood behind her, equally humbled, nodding. "We didn't see it. We didn't understand." Marcy looked at her former tormentors, seeing the fear, the humility, and the awe in their expressions. But she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't about them. It was about herself. She extended her hand briefly, shaking Jessica, then turned away. She had no need for validation from those who had once hurt her. Her triumph was complete on its own terms. She climbed back into the Apache, helmet secured, fingers flying over controls with practiced ease. Officer Daniels followed in the second helicopter. Together they lifted off, ascending into the night sky. The crowd below watched, silent and captivated, as the two Apache disappeared into the stars, leaving a trail of awe, admiration, and disbelief. From above, Marcy looked down at the town, the lights twinkling below like a memory of the life she had once been forced to navigate quietly. She thought of all the moments she had been underestimated, laughed at, and dismissed. Every tear, every hardship, every lonely night had led to this. And now, she had rewritten her narrative in the most dramatic, unforgettable way possible. As they flew over the horizon, the finality of the night settled in. The reunion, the ridicule, the shock, it was over. But the story, the legend, the proof that the underestimated could rise would echo forever. Marcy's journey from the class reject to a master of the skis was complete, cinematic, and unforgettable. Back on the ground, alumni would recount the night for years. Did you see her? Did you see what she did? They would speak of the helicopters, the drone, the precision maneuvers, and the courage it took to command the sky above everyone who had once mocked her. They would tell stories of awe and humility, of a young woman who had transformed humiliation into triumph. And Marcy, soaring high above the town, felt the satisfaction of every challenge met, every fear conquered, every expectation surpassed. She wasn't just the girl they had laughed at. She was Marcy Ellis, pilot, warrior, survivor, and above all, untouchable. The night sky stretched endlessly before her, a canvas for infinite possibility. The hum of the Apache was a lullaby of victory. And in that moment, Marcy knew the truth she had proven to the world and herself. No one can define your limits but you. No one can write your story but you. And the underestimated will always rise. As the helicopters disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind a town forever changed, the story of the class reject, who conquered the skis, would be told, retold, and never forgotten. 10 years of pain, doubt, and dismissal had led to one unforgettable night, a night where courage, skill, and determination silenced mockery and transformed humiliation into legend. And for Marcy Ellis, that night was just the beginning of a life no one, and certainly no high school bully, could ever underestimate again.